everyone, and thank you so very much for joining us today on another episode of Talking Cloud. My name's Grant Asplund. I'm here with my expert and great friend, Patrick Pusher. Patrick, how you doing, man?
Buddy, I'm doing well, although I have to be honest, the snow returned this week. And even for way up here, the snow in April kind of sucks. Although you had a big dump like the other week, a big dump,
Uh,
right?
it's I couldn't believe it. I was on the freeway yesterday driving back from a conference I spoke at, and on the way home went through two squalls that was hail, and they were really nasty ones. And I'm not kidding. We weren't at the front of it, right? We
Uh-huh.
weren't the first ones going into it. Those people were in the median. I mean, there were five cars just scattered all around because
Really?
I don't think
Yikes.
they were prepared to be on all those little marbles of ice.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just nuts. But yeah, we've had kooky weather. In fact, Monday morning, I got up, I looked out the window. They had said we may get a trace down at the valley floor, which is where I live. Dude, 3 inches.
I know you sent me that
Four,
picture. I was
four.
like,
I mean,
looks like Canada,
it
looks like
was,
my homeland.
it was crazy.
I
So,
know.
yeah, we've definitely had some very unusual weather, but it almost seems par for the course on how things have been these last couple of years, man. Lots of
I hear
weird
you.
stuff. I
Indeed.
mean, just lots of weird stuff. And but man, I'm super excited because I'm finally getting out and getting a chance to get in front of people. First time in 2.5 years, I spoke live down in Denver and again in
Yeah, man.
Seattle, and really, really happy about that. But
Yes.
looking
Yes.
forward to when we can be in the same city together soon, my man.
Soon.
We'll do it soon. But listen, let's jump into the news. There's some interesting headlines I found that I
Sounds great.
wanted to kind of throw out there with you. Um, and so this was the first one. And, I'm going to, I got friends at Gigamon, okay? But I'm telling you, I saw the headline of, the most important cloud security factor. That was what was the clickbait title. And I clicked on it, and I get this. Now, sponsored, obviously, press release, but the most important cloud security factor is visibility. If there is not a Captain Obvious,
Yes.
stupid statement, this is kind of pathetic that this is how who can find anything if they can't see? I mean,
I know.
come
I know.
on.
It's up there with, you can't, if you can't see it, you can't secure it. Yeah, no, no shit, right? I mean, let's
Yeah,
just,
yeah,
let's call it what it
exactly.
is. Of course I have to be
Yeah,
able to see everything to
exactly.
be able to secure it. That's, do we need a survey and a web page on the internet, yet another one to tell us that?
It just to me is quite remarkable, right? That this is what this is what people are pumping out as the most important thing. I
Yeah.
got to get to my screen again here, Patrick. So hang on a second, and hopefully I'll be able to get back to the right window.
All good. But yeah,
Here I am.
you
Okay.
you're right. It is interesting that this is the top thing. Maybe it just speaks to how, not elementary, it's the wrong word, how foundational the challenges once you move to the cloud really are, how those assumptions
Yeah.
break down, right? I can't see things. I don't know where, when I'm using services as a service, I expect to see more detail, and I don't know how to
Yeah.
troubleshoot problems when I don't have that detail, right? Maybe it just boils down to that. But at this point in 2022, it just seems a little bit elementary.
So for me, it reminds me very much in the days when VMware came out,
Hmm.
right? And all of a sudden, I had an ESX server that had, 20, 30, 60 VMs
Sure.
running, right? and not having that visibility between VMs, that intra VM communication.
Of course.
Um,
Yeah.
that was a big deal, and obviously it was kind of like the one you, if you had that solution, you were pounding on it. But this reminds me very similarly as you look at moving into cloud. It's to me again, Captain Obvious for sure. Interesting here, they're talking about increasing complexity and cost hinder successful management of multi-cloud. I think that that's pretty much every vendor's hook when it comes to
Mm.
their solution in the cloud, right? Multi-vendor, because
Yes.
no cloud vendors really working to optimize for the other two or three.
That's right.
Um,
That's right.
but anyway, enough bashing on Gigamon. Thanks for pointing out the obvious. This is the next one I found that was interesting. And, I'm being honest, when I first looked at it, I thought I saw SSL, and I just recalled back when I worked at Blue Coat and there was a bug discovered. This was like 2016, I want to
Mm.
say. But there was a bug discovered in OpenSSL. And virtually every security vendor on the planet
Yeah.
used those
In some
libraries.
way, that's
And
right.
so it was really an earth shaker. But this I still found interesting because it's actually taking some action. It looks like while they'll still support the elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman key exchange, they're implementing this n true prime algorithm that apparently is able to resist brute force attacks. And this we know is one of the attributes or capabilities we're expecting from quantum computing,
Right.
right? As it
That's right.
evolves, it's going to become Hulk and just be able to break anything. But
That's right.
I thought this was interesting. But I think you actually first pointed this out. Um, it is interesting that they're actually taking action, and they reference
Yeah.
NIST here. And Patrick, it reminded me when I was selling IoT security, and everybody was just clamoring for NIST, 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 and their guidelines and
Mm-hmm.
protocols.
Mm-hmm.
And when they finally published, it was dreadful because it was almost like they were back in the horse and buggy days. They just, they're writing for
Yeah.
IoT with footprints of hundreds and hundreds of K when, I mean, footprints were in single digit K, right? I mean, it was just really, really bad. And so, I know they've come out recently and kind of tried to sharpen the pencil, but NIST has kind of lost their luster. It seems like there's some other organizations that are ahead and doing a better job. MITRE might be one that comes to mind, in terms
Right.
of just
Right. Maybe some other standards that
recommending.
are, yeah,
Yeah,
a
yeah, yeah,
little more agile, perhaps. Right. Yeah. I agree. I think NIST is in the unique position of sort of being relied upon by maybe the world's most conservative industries, right? And so I think
yeah.
they're in a tough spot. Yeah, I agree. I think what I liked about the article you're sharing there is that they're actually doing something today. There's so much speculation around how quantum is going to affect mostly sort of algorithms, but yeah, even imagine like a quantum backed brute force attack. I mean, is there anything that could withstand that? I sort of doubt it. We're barely keeping force with the non-quantum ways that the bad guys
That's
know how to
right.
brute force, right? So
That's
so
right.
yeah, I think the takeaway is they are not waiting for this NIST work group and eventual standard to evolve. They're taking action today, which is interesting. I think they're among the first, I think, to do so.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing. So the last one I found I wanted to talk about is this one. Five. Now, again, I'm not trying to be a basher or anything, but when I look at a headline, it's important to me to be a leading indicator of what I'm going to get.
Of course.
Okay,
I'm going to
five.
invest my time based on that headline, right?
Right, five common cloud misconfiguration errors. And I read through what Mr. Zurier has to say, and he points out a Cloud Security Alliance 51 thought misconfigurations is one of their leading concerns. Of course, we know that, right? Gartner said 99% of all failures are going to be the user's fault. It's going to be through these
Yes.
misconfigurations. But he jumps kind of all over, and then he goes down. Here are the five unrestricted inbound and outbound ports. Well, I mean, that's not. I mean, he's not really talking about a specific misconfiguration. I guess he's saying, this is a problem area.
Sloppy port
But
hygiene. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Which is
yeah.
not
But
wrong. Yeah.
not wrong.
Yeah.
However, in this day and age, can't we get a little more data? Can't you give me a little bit more to tell me if I need to care?
Falls
Has
into
it
that
been
last
used?
bucket
Has
a
it
little
been
bit,
access?
right? Visibility, right? That's all we can say. Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
exactly.
I worry a little bit about that one being, we're giving permission to our CSPM vendors to, continue to write those dumb port checks where they have a rule for
Yep,
every single service, right? And you wind up with
yep.
like 1,000 rules that all they're doing is checking ports in your environment. And we've
It's
got
it's
we've got to get
almost
better than that.
binary.
Yeah, yeah,
Yep, on, off,
yep,
yes, no,
yep.
light switch kind of mentality. So then he writes lack of security standards for third party integrations. I'm sorry, how is that a cloud misconfiguration?
Yeah. It's not. It's a problem, but it's not a misconfiguration. It belongs in
It's
another list
it's it's
somewhere. Yeah.
it sure does. I mean, and look, this you know what, Patrick? As long as I've been in this business and we standardized on TCP/IP, this has been an issue, particularly in the world of security.
Yes.
This whole notion of standardization, but the difficulty I think is there's so much innovation that you can't plan for, and I don't want to have to do something to integrate with others if it might stymie something I might do.
For sure.
I,
For
I
sure.
just I think that the fact is we could agree on output of data, we could agree on tags and descriptions, but that integration. I think this is one of the reasons why vendor consolidation is such a big deal right now. Is because it's difficult to
Yes.
integrate a whole bunch of different vendors'
It is.
products
It is. And that point is definitely SolarWinds inspired. It oozes that for sure. And it's well intentioned, but
completely.
there's a lot of trust that has to be there, right? Because what are you going to
Yep.
do? You're going to audit your third party's entire security design? No, you're going to send them a giant questionnaire. They're going to respond to it. You're going to have your basic technical checks. And unfortunately, there's a lot of faith that has to be present there, right? There just is.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right, and that's why they have SLAs. I mean, it's why you go through all of those checks, and then you still have a contract that says, "Okay, you're going to deliver this for me.
Yes.
This is what you said you can do."
Yeah.
Um, so here again, I failure to establish a security baseline for cloud development, misconfiguration, best practice.
Yeah. That's the best practice for
I
sure.
mean,
Yeah.
it certainly is not a misconfiguration. Unnecessary changes to cloud vendor defaults. I found this one interesting, Patrick, because I recall, it used to be, hey, you can't trust the cloud vendors to appropriately and properly pre-configure everything. Their default settings are very likely not right. And
Right.
the one that was such a big one was the proverbial S3 unencrypted.
That's
And
right.
I think it's reversed now, right? So you have to go in and physically say, no, I don't want it encrypted. But this is arguing that every major cloud service provider uses default configurations that's set to private. I mean,
That's
it
not
just
true.
is so broad. It's
Just
so
blanket not
broad
true.
brush, and it's
And it's bad. It's
exactly
bad advice,
it.
right? Like you're
Yes,
right. If you go look at S3 as a particular example, then this author is absolutely right. They've not all these kinds of controls around it to make sure you don't absent-mindedly send it to public. Yet
right.
you still have a set of default security groups in every region with wide open rules that are easy to
Yep.
attach to resources. private by default at all, right? I'm not arguing
Exactly.
it's even a bad design, but it's not what this author suggests. So yeah, it's
Exactly.
dangerous. It's dangerous.
And I point this out, and here again, development team has not set the proper security controls. Here again, not a misconfiguration, a best practice,
Yes.
an approach to how you should look at. But my point to this, and my comment to Steve, if you're listening, is, man, people are looking to you for guidance and recommendation. People are looking to SC Media and other rags for help. And we can't take them wandering through the mulberry bush. We need to, have accurate headlines that associate and tie with the content and a construct of the article.
Yeah.
I mean, because I didn't point it out, but, he goes off, right here about mobile developers and personal data more than I'm not sure what it had to do with.
Yeah.
It just seemed to be kind of an all-inclusive vegetable soup.
Yeah.
But for me, I thought we're not doing a real service for our readers.
Yeah.
When we take them on that kind of walk. So
I agree. And there's not that there were bad ideas in there. There's probably every point could have been its own article, right? But if you're going to say, hey, here's 5, we know what cloud misconfiguration is supposed to mean. That's a standard, right?
yep,
I've got
yep,
things configured wrong. How they got there, who knows? But that's, that clearly wasn't that article.
yep.
However, talking about cloud configuration or misconfigurations, I found this, you shared some news last week about just how big this cloud and
Yep.
cloud security market kind of is and how quickly it's growing. And, you and I were lucky enough to be involved in the foundation of kind of the CSPM market. So I'm always keen on when I see titles like this. It seems to be growing quickly. This report seems to think it's going to be worth almost $9 billion in a few short years. That, it's hard to believe there's going to be that much spending in the CSPM market. But
Yep.
we see by then, we already see a lot of consolidation. We saw all these CSPM vendors go out and buy parts of the solution they didn't have yet. I don't think really any of them developed them in-house, right? They developed something and then they maybe bought the parts around it. And, they're all rushing to become this really wide platform. So perhaps that number isn't too far off. But I found it really interesting for sure that, that it's growing that quickly.
Leading CSPM vendors. But what I think is interesting, and I'm trying to think of a good analogy, because it seems like everybody and their brother has a CSPM, right? I mean, the number of entrants into the space is really pretty remarkable, and I
For
think
sure.
that speaks to the size of the market, and that the fact is there'll probably be a lot of players that are second rate, but meet a need for a particular niche or market
For
size,
sure.
right?
Yeah, for sure. And I find this really, really interesting because there's this trend of security vendors, CSPM vendors, to acquire or build functionality. But now I also see a ton of startups fractioning off solving problems that the CSPM vendors aren't, like deep IAM analytics or deep data security, right? And the CSPM vendors kind of solve a higher level sort of generic problem. So I find it really interesting. They're on this acquisition spree, but then I find now especially a ton of startups trying to solve the problems where they find gaps in CSPM solutions. So it'll be, maybe
Yeah.
in about this time we'll see this second generation of this wave of acquisitions happen, right? And these platforms widen even more. We'll see.
Yeah. It's really, I mean, it reminds me of the way the Earth, the scientists believe the Earth and continents and bodies of land shifted and moved and restructured and reconnected, and I find it fascinating.
Yes, for sure. The last thing, and I have two links that I want to cover here that I thought was interesting this week was, that a large number of our software code bases, and this article talks about it in the context of open source software, contain at least one software vulnerability. at least one. I mean, nobody contains only one, right? But I found this really, really interesting. There's this struggle an IT manager side, to patch as current as we can, but then there's pushback from those who run applications that they have dependencies and they can't write. So kind of as I read this, I also read the fact that Microsoft has sort of made the choice in the next generation of Windows 10 and for sure in Windows 11, they're going to patch themselves. So they're going to take the user out of that process, right? And I'm sure there's going to be ways to configure them like they work today, but the goal is going to be take the user out of the process. We can't do this in the data center. We can't do this in the public cloud on server infrastructure, right? We depend on version levels staying relatively standard until we can do kind of testing, right? We can't afford downtime that a single desktop user can, for sure. But I think this is probably a sign of the times.
So I'm curious, enterprises, large organizations, they have very strict and tight control management, change management. Oftentimes they've got applications that only work with this version, and a new version or a new update is going to break it. I'm curious, today, enterprises have the control over that process, right?
Yeah.
They're the ones that push the updates. They're the one that say, okay, I want everyone to get this latest update. I don't want them to get this update. Tools like Kanji, I think is, one of the tools that Checkpoint uses, right? That is all about controlling and pushing to you, the version of the browser I want you to use, the version of Zoom I want you to use, the version of, and so I find this very interesting, and I'll be curious how much latitude or capability will be offered to the enterprise to still kind of corral, control, throttle, manage that update, or if it's going to be, hey, if you want this OS, you're going to have this option.
I expect. Yeah, I agree. I expect in the short term they'll have all the control they have now. In the medium term, who knows? I guess it depends how big the problem becomes. And how big of a heavy-handed solution outweighs the actual sort of problem. So we'll see. I know from us supporting our family perspective, boy, I'd love it if all the machines patch themselves. Let me tell you, that would be wonderful.
My God, when I look at my wife's machine, I'm telling you, it's like, oh my God, when's the last time you updated the OS?
I know.
What?
So, I mean, that's who this is going to help, right? It is.
Yep, that's right.
At the cost of potentially having a little bit of incompatibility, but hopefully the auto push is on a very gentle setting where, there's a little bit more testing for compatibility done, but, we'll see how it goes.
Yeah. Well, and, let's face it, man. 20 years ago, the majority was those that self-assigned an IP address that, had no problem self-configuring. That wasn't a big deal. And as the growth of the user population took off, and the ease of access and use with DHCP and all the other capabilities to automate the process, that teeter-totter shifted from, and I used to have a presentation that showed that, the 80-20 rule was 80% were uber technical and 20% were the nots, and maybe it was even 90-10, right? That's right. Now it's the other way, right?
Absolutely it is.
Far and away the minority know even what bind is as it relates to DNS. People that we're hiring, and names won't be mentioned, but, I just was talking with a couple of them. Do you know what bind is? Mm-mm. Do you know what DNS is? Well, sort of,
Yeah.
That I find remarkable, but it just shows that's not where the growth of the user base is.
Yes,
The growth of the
for sure.
user base is people that see it as a tool. I
Yeah,
need a screwdriver,
that's right. The
right?
promise of this tech for forever, right, is the every user, right? We're there, but
Yeah,
now we've got all
yeah,
these new challenges of how do we keep them safe, how do we keep them secure, how do we protect them against not only everyone else but themselves. So yeah, it's no small feat.
yeah. And what's different too is, a telephone in its early incarnation had just what, four wires? I mean, really
Yeah,
basic
yeah,
communications. And despite getting additional wires to do things like call waiting and caller ID and all this other stuff, I mean, it was the same thing,
yeah,
right? The sophistication and complication didn't increase in terms of that functionality. When you contrast that with computers, microprocessors, what's going on, at that level on the tech side, completely opposite, right?
yes,
And that adds, it just makes the dynamic crazy when you think about how much more there is underneath the hood
yeah.
compared to four wires, and that's how could make a phone call.
That's right. That's right.
Kind of
We, we
crazy.
we exponentially grew. Yep.
Yeah. Gosh, we've had a great news segment today. I always like talking about this stuff. I think you provide such keen insight, and I really mean that. I just think it really is helpful. So, and hey, no bash on my buddies at Gigamon, man. I
Of
love
course
you,
not.
but let's raise it up a notch on the Captain Obvious stuff. Okay. So, hey, we got to get to our guest.
Yes, we do.
Jazzed. Let's go meet who we're going to have on a program today.
Let's go.
Eric,
There he is.
hi.
Hello. Hi, guys.
How are
Welcome.
you?
Thanks for being here.
No worries. How's everybody doing today?
Good. So, a couple
Great.
of things. This is the new Talking Cloud, and it's with video, and so thanks very much for being a part of it. We're excited. Two, we're already rolling, and we're live, although we're not streaming anywhere. So, but we're just taking on a little bit of a different format with the new program. It'll have some various different segments. Then we're going to have our guest. And from now on, I'll do a better job informing them that you'll be walking onto stage.
Well, I read your stuff, your preamble, so I was prepared for it. I actually like the format.
Okay.
Awesome.
So it's pretty cool.
Good. Well, I want to make sure I have it correct. Kedrosky.
You got it.
Okay, perfect. Eric's the first name, obviously. Sisso for Sunrise. Do you say Sunrise, Sunray? How do you pronounce it?
Sunry.
Sunri. Okay, I missed it, but
Sunri.
I got it. Sunri Security.
Interesting fact, if you wanted to throw it in, it's Irish Gaelic for data. So the company actually means data security, and our CEO is Irish. So,
Aha. So there's a little story. Well, you'll be pleased to know that you have a countryman joining you. Patrick is in Alberta, and so he is also in Canada. And I'm over in the Pacific Northwest. So we're definitely doing a good job stretching coast to coast here.
there we go.
So, hey, look at this is really just what the title is, Eric. It's Talking Cloud. And what I generally do is I like to throw back to my guest, the opportunity to kind of just talk about yourself, how you got to where you are, however you want to push the boat from the dock, so to speak. And then we'll just dive in. Patrick, long in the tooth in cloud and cloud native since like 2013. So definitely, you can go as deep as you want. And then I'd love to understand your role within a cloud security vendor and how that differs if it does.
Yeah, cool. Okay. How do you want to get rolling?
Kick it off. Tell me about yourself and how you paddled up the river to where you are today. Or floated, or floated down, right? I mean, whichever way it happened to be for you.
River, yeah.
That's right. That's right.
I think paddling up the river, or really what I've said a bunch of times is bushwhacking. You know, I started in. I'm a computer engineer by schooling, and I actually was fortunate enough to start in the information security industry about 20 years ago, right out of engineering school. And you know, at that time, it looked vastly different than it was today, and it certainly, as I like to say, before it was ever cool and talked about. I found myself in that world, and so I kind of came up the chain through the SecOps side of things. You know, one of my big things was, you know, as an analyst to start, and then running like a global CSIRT team for a very, very large multinational telecommunications company, where you know, before there were tools in the market, or really good tools in the market, we had to do it all ourselves. You know, we had to build the tools to detect the things. We had to build the tools that shut down things. You know, we had to clean up stuff ourselves manually.
Right.
You know, and that really taught me from the start this hands-on sort of approach to security, and really understanding what it is we were trying to protect, and then figuring out how to build tools to protect it. And then sort of doing the information, sort of the incident management type of roles. Like I said, I was responsible for our CSIRT team globally. I went through some pretty nasty situations where, you know, we had incidents that would last into, you know, 36 hours straight of just literally being up. And that really gave me a view to sort of the threat landscape that was out there. I mean, there's a lot of theory. I became a CISSP at the time, and there was theory in that, but this is really where your theory went out the window and was put into practice. And so, you know, I learned a lot about incident management, which is a huge skill to learn. But I also learned a lot about the threat landscape. And you know, just because there's a book or a guru that says this is how it happens, when you're dealing with it yourself, you know, it's a different story. And then so I just kind of continued on that route in security, and I did some time in product management to sort of learn the customer side of security, because I was always really interested in that. I was fortunate enough to do some consulting with that company as well, and got into the product side, which is really fun and really interesting to learn that. How do the customers, if I was the customer, you know, helping other customers solve their problems, and so that was really super cool to get that aspect. And then I just sort of continued on the path in security, and then finally, you know, kind of became leading a security team and InfoSec manager. And instead of being the person with hands on keyboard, I was responsible for building teams and building programs, which again was sort of another step in on the route to CISO. You know, how do you do this? How do you protect a company? What's the right strategy to use? What are the right controls to put in place? There's a ton of information out there. And this is what we'll get to talking about the cloud. There's a whole bunch of information out there, but it's how do you choose the right things that are relevant to you? And so I learned a lot there. And then by chance, and it was just sort of a risk I took, I went and did some M&A for a while. So I went and worked with a strategy team, an M&A team, and we did a deal. We bought a company and we sold a company. We did a bunch of stuff. But really what that made me realize is that information security wasn't, and still really isn't, part of the due diligence process when we do M&A. So when they run a due diligence, they look at financials, they look at risk, but not security risk. And I remember one of the deals we did, I was like, hey, where's the information security due diligence? And I was friends with the chief legal officer at this company, and he's like, that's a good point. And we did it. And the risks we actually found in the business that we were purchasing could have cost us millions of dollars if we didn't know about it.
That's a risk. That's a risk burning opportunity. I mean, come on, you know it and I know it, right? You go back, you present that as a huge risk. I'm going to bail. Oh, wait. And all of a sudden you just saved yourself some money, right? Not saying it's not legit, but that's kind of the dynamics.
Well, I mean, and nowadays, you know, all companies have technology. And so the purpose of doing that process when you're in the buying side, or whether you're an investor in it, an equity investor or whatever, is am I getting what I'm paying for? And it's
Yeah.
like you buy a car. Well, you're going to make sure that the engine's running, and you're going to make sure that the brakes are working. And if it doesn't, you're going to have to say, I don't want this, or I'm going to pay a lot less. And anyway, so that's what I learned there.
I'll tell you something that's kind of
And then along
interesting.
came, what's that?
So one of the things that we recently introduced as we go through RFPs with companies is looking at the performance of the competitors and ourselves with regards to number of CVEs, how long did they drag around, how quickly were they fixed and absolved. And it's remarkable how that too is never in the criteria, but you would think
Yeah.
is pretty critical. So I couldn't agree with you more, Eric.
Yeah. Well, I use a statistic a lot now when talking about data in the cloud, but The Economist said it a couple of years ago, how data is now the most expensive commodity in the world. And that was a couple of years ago. And so if most companies are run with data and most companies' most valuable thing is data, why are most companies not treating it the same way as like a tangible asset? Like if you had gold bars or your secret formula for your whatever, you guarantee that that tangible asset is kept very secure. But yet we're still trying to struggle with the whole keeping the data secure. And sort of through those roles, that's sort of what I learned along the way. And then came the cloud. I was at a company at the time that was very much in the data center. And we had a multi-million dollar, like a $12 million a year infrastructure cost in a data center. Mm-hmm. And, the smart individual who worked for me there, who works for me now still, basically came to me and said, hey, boss, if we go to this Amazon cloud thing that we've been reading a lot about, we can save 86% of the cost. So 86% of $12 million a year bill. I mean, I went to my CFO, who was my boss, and I laughed because I've never seen a CFO say yes so fast in my life, right?
Right.
And we moved to the cloud. And within 3 months, that company was in the cloud and saving those costs. But man, did the world ever flip on its head. Once we started moving out of the data center, where we had a great, I had 15 years at the time or whatever at the time, a lot of time in the data center. We knew everything. We knew the controls. We knew how to protect stuff. We knew the gear. And then along came the cloud, and you realize, wait a minute, your perimeter's kind of gone. You don't really have a perimeter anymore in the traditional sense. You can't just build a network or a bunch of little networks and put some security gear in between where the data flows in and out, and that's your security stack, and that's how you monitor and block everything. Data transfers in the clouds, what I like to call it the cloud level. So at that time, there wasn't even firewalls. So if I was transferring data from one data store to another data store across the country, that wasn't happening at the internet level where I could put a fancy next generation firewall. That was happening at the cloud level. And that was being done via an API call. And so you begin to realize that sort of like, yeah, the fundamentals of information security are still there, but the cloud flipped it all on its head, and we had to start relearning, or like when I came out of school in the early days when there wasn't a lot of tooling in the InfoSec space, how to do this. And you had to learn about the clouds and about the IAM models and the data models and all that stuff to start then thinking, how do we put controls around this? And so this is where I find myself now, working for an organization that builds a platform to do just that.
And how involved are you, Eric, with the product and development? As a CISO, you think it's internally focused for the organization. Are you straddling that fence? Talk a little bit about that.
Very much so. Yeah, very much so. I mean, I've got my internal CISO duties, which is basically eating our own dog food and using our own product as part of my security suite of tools. But because of my experience in the area, I spend a lot of time talking to customers, talking to other CISOs in the industry, in a very consultative role a lot of the times is basically I've been where you are. I've seen the problem that you're trying to solve, and I try to help them educate them for one, because that's a huge part of the role right now, is educating the CISOs on the journey that I was on, helping them understand where they are and then helping them solve problems. And then I bring that back into the product to say, listen, I'm working with this, large multinational FI financial institution that's got this problem and they got to protect this data in this way. How can we help them? How can we extend our platform to do this better, or to do it in a way that they need?
So why don't you talk a little bit about the platform? I mean, I was looking through on the website, and thank you, Gartner, because we're coming up with CNAP and CSPM and SIM or Kim or whatever you want to call her, and so it's all mumbled and jumbled, clearly, which is clear evidence that this is not settled out. It's fast-moving water. There's a continuing shift and change. But nonetheless, you guys are building solutions. So talk a little bit about them.
Yeah, I mean, first I'd like to define the problem. And as we've kind of talked about already, the problem is that modern application development in the cloud has kind of eviscerated your traditional security controls. And so it's created unique risks that those old tools definitely can't handle and can't see. And that's really making CISOs, all of us, feel frustrated and also feel a bit exposed. We know there's problems, but we know we're not solving the problems or even seeing some of the problems. And so what Sunray helps to do is see everything across, not just within a cloud, but across all of your clouds. So that could be your platform risks. CSPM is the acronym, like you like to say, and that I coined, securing your foundation. It helps you see and inventory all of your identities in the cloud. And, we all know about your traditional people identities, Eric, Grant, Patrick, Bob, Jane, whatever. And that was a very big thing in the data center. But in the cloud, you have these non-person identities. So roles and service principals and serverless functions and virtual machines that have identities. And all these things are called everything. And so Sunray sees all of that in the identity space. And that's great, and it inventories it. But what you really need to know is, what can those things actually do? What permissions do those identities have? And for a good example is, a lot of things only see like a level deep. Oh, Eric and Grant are in this group, and that gives them these set of permissions by looking at that group, and they're fine. When in actuality, what tends to happen in the cloud is you get these permission chains that happen. And so Eric and Grant might be in that group, but maybe someone misconfigured it where there's a permission that allows Eric and Grant now to assume an AWS role or a service principal, and that allows us to do something else. And maybe now acting as that non-person identity, we can assume another role into another account. So what we see a lot of is when organizations think that the developer Eric is locked down a developer account, the actual identity chain says that the user Eric can actually hop a bunch of roles, which we like to call lateral movement, in the cloud using identities to get to the most sensitive data. And there's a very notable breach of an FI a bunch of years ago where this was the main problem. An attacker got a hold of an identity that gave them access to all of their sensitive data and then transferred it out the window. So from the identity perspective, that's what Sunray does. And then lastly, from a data perspective, the biggest thing I ask CISOs now when I talk to them is I say, well, do you know where all of your data is? And sure enough, somebody comes up with an architecture diagram or gets up on a whiteboard and draws out their data flow diagram for me. And I say, well, that's great, but that's where your data is supposed to be. Do you know where it actually is right now? And then you tend to get these sort of head scratching and blank looks. So what Sunray helps to do is tell you where all your data is in the cloud. So if you have a policy, which most of us do, or if you don't, you should have, that says no production data, no sensitive data is allowed to leave production or this region or whatever, well, you need to verify that there is none of that data sitting in a developer account or exposed to the internet somewhere. So we help you see that. And then we calculate, what are the identities that can access that data? So, okay, I know where my data is. I know what it is. It's PII, it's health records, it's whatever. That's great. But can Patrick access that data? And should Patrick access that data? Can Grant access that data? And if he shouldn't, we need to drive that to least privilege. So we basically connect all the dots to help uncover those toxic relationships. And so that's great. We're raising problems, and every security person is going to go, great, I've got more problems. But another really important thing, and this is what I'm passionate about because it comes from my background being an incident responder, being a SecOps person, is how the heck do you deal with those problems? It's great to see them, it's great to raise them, but how do you deal with them? And so what the platform helps you do is not only prioritize them based on criticality, risk, right? Measure your risk, but again, in the cloud world, you know, we've got DevOps teams doing a lot of the work. So instead of burying a cloud team in the problems, or instead of burying a SecOps team in the problems, you actually send the problem to the group that created the problem. So if we've got Grant here building an application and we've got Patrick here building an application, and you guys deviate from the security controls, well, those things get found out. And then the alert, the ticket, the whatever actually goes to Grant's team and actually goes to Patrick's team because it's their responsibility to fix, not the security person's.
Right.
And then last but not least, again, coming from the operations world, okay, now you, Grant, have a bunch of things to fix. Well, why don't we use the cloud for what it's really worth? That why all these organizations are going to the cloud. You can do so much better security in the cloud using cloud native APIs and tooling. So basically the platform provides a way to which to automate the fixing of the problems. So Sunry sees the problems, connects the dots to find the risks, gets the problems to the right teams, and then enables the teams to fix those problems, as I like to say, at the speed and the scale of the cloud using the cloud. And so that's what Sunry does.
So you mentioned
that's really interesting. Sorry, go ahead, Grant.
No, I'm going to just ask one question, and then Patrick, by all means, dive in. But you mentioned we know what the data is. So how do you do data classification yourself? Are you hooking into data classification? Yes. So you're actually looking inside that repository and seeing the type of data that it is. Got it.
Exactly. As I like to say, we answer the question, where is my data? But as we all know, not all data is created equal. As a CISO, I've got to put my time and my resources, and my finances, which are both all three of them are limited, to protecting the most important stuff. Yeah. So I have to not only know where all my data is, but I have to say, wait a minute, that data right there, those two buckets or those storage accounts or databases, they actually hold our most sensitive data.
Sure.
So we have a classification engine that actually goes in and will classify the data based on well-known data algorithms, or you can actually train our classification engine to look for specific data that might be proprietary to you.
And agent or
agentless.
So no agents.
Yep.
Okay.
Because
Patrick?
it's all done with cloud native APIs, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, Eric, I was interested in the last part of that sort of journey. You talked about how it was, you're able to find deviations in identities and not just kind of first level ones, right? I was sort of lucky enough to be involved in the birth of the CSPM, and I think of that as Gen 1, where we did a bunch of really useful, but especially by now, sort of trivial measurements around identity. You're talking about direct permissions, group permissions, even what can I do if I can assume a role, right? What sort of big lateral movement, as you coined it, possibilities through IAM do I have? That all sounds wonderful. And then at the end, what is that last mile? Is there some automation capability to sort of fix this? Talk to me about what that looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. So like what we're talking about with the identity chains, we call it, finding the effective permissions or the end-to-end permissions. So we have a patented technology that actually goes in the cloud and computes the effective permission for every single identity that you have. So can Patrick, through a bunch of lateral movements, actually access the most sensitive data? And we show you the path and we show you the policies where that happens. So that's how we do that. And we calculate that we call them effective permissions or end-to-end permissions. When it comes to the automation, again, organizations move to the cloud because of this. That's why apps get to the cloud faster. That's why people build quickly. That's why everybody loves the cloud. So in the security space, we're sitting here going, guys, we got to use the cloud as security people to solve our problems. So what we enable the organizations to do is really break up their cloud sort of contextually. And the best example I generally give is application-based. One of my large financial customers does this. They have a whole bunch of applications in the cloud. And so they've broken it up in Sunry to say, here's the non-prod and here's the prod. When the prod reaches secure, it can get promoted to the cloud. And then when it's in the cloud, it's being monitored. And a deviation from their controls, whether they built them in or whether they use ours out of the box happens, that ticket, as we call it, would go to that team. And so that team can choose to manually fix the problem if they want, but who wants to do that? Because it's probably not just somewhere once, it's probably somewhere a bunch of times. We enable them to do using what we call intelligent workflows is then to escalate those to, say, an automation scheme. So if myself as a CISO says, we should have no data store put on the internet ever, unless it's an exception. So I have something monitoring that 24/7 by 365, and oopsie, somebody put an S3 bucket on the internet, that ticket would fire. It doesn't even go to a person. It goes right to the bot. The bot goes out and does a cloud native call and says, delete bucket. And that bucket gets deleted. And that automation happens just by itself. So you, again, free up the teams that are still responsible for solving the problems by allowing them to automate the solutions. And when it comes to identities, we can do the same thing. We can find that Patrick has access to all of our data in our Microsoft SQL store, even across cloud, from Amazon through GCP all the way to Azure. We can calculate that. Well, what we can also do is, since we know where the problems occur, we can run automation that cleans up the policies. And we have a feature that actually recommends the least effective policy that you can run based on the actions that we see Patrick doing. And you can automatically implement those. So you have a bot that goes out and goes, fix this policy with the least privilege, fix this policy, fix this policy. And at the end of it, Patrick no longer has access to that. And now he's at least privilege. So that's kind of what we can do.
Yeah, it sounds like you have a decent intermediate step, right? Because I can imagine as these identity chains get really complex, there might have to be a little bit of judgment in terms of what one should have and what one shouldn't, right? The more trivial ones I would think would be kind of easier, absolutely judged, but maybe the more complex ones might take that, well, yes or no, and then once you have somebody in the know that says yes or no, they can sort of trip the appropriate automation then.
Exactly, and we see a lot of that with large, like, the automation part is great, and I agree with you. It's cleaning up a lot of the dead wood. It's cleaning up a lot of the low-hanging fruit.
Sure.
But you're right. And so because we use graphing technology, we can visualize the identity chains. And that's really what a lot of our more sophisticated customers, or with these really complex identity chains, use it for, is they can actually look at the chain and say, wow, there's 6 steps here. What do we need to fix here? What do we need to fix here? What do we need to fix here? And they can visualize it. And like I said, we actually can recommend least privilege as well, because we see all the actions that are happening. So if Patrick never used 99 of the 100 actions that he has permission to do, our least policy engine says to them, well, your policy might want to look like this. And we actually give them a recommendation that they can then, take themselves and implement if they want to.
Yeah, makes sense. I think we're certainly seeing more and more ML, more and more AI. The data samples are enormous. That's changing the game significantly. But I think what's interesting is the comment you made, Patrick, is that, closer we get to the tip of that pencil, that's when it's still kind of subject to a human who knows, right? I mean, that's it. My visual is, the guy who's sitting on the nose of a huge missile. I don't know why, but I mean, it's like you still have to have somebody. We're not at the point where we can let these things go and they're always right?
Yep.
Right. That's a good way to say they're always right. Right. There is a class of problem we can sort of let go, but it's still fairly trivial, right? But I mean, there's 2 kind of problems I see. If you really are looking for full automation, no human in the chain, then, right, as a user of a service like Sunry or any other third-party security service, right, I have to be able to express what I'm looking for with a lot of specificity, right? This tag, this geo, this region of AWS, whatever, right? When you see this condition, I need more than something kind of off the shelf, right? As a user, if I'm going to attach some auto remediation to it, I really have to have the confidence there will be zero false positives, right? Any kind of significant one, right? So as a user of these kinds of services and as somebody who's built them, I think of that a lot, right? How do we get out of the business of making assumptions for our users and make them feel comfortable that they can express kind of whatever they want?
Yeah, and
it's hard.
I've got a great story on that that one as well, because I agree with you, because I've been there. I'm also responsible for that, and as we know with any product, it's like, okay, that does 80% of what I need. How do I get the rest of what I need? And so this very, very large financial that I worked with, they have their own set of controls for the cloud. And they said, Sunry, you've got a great set of controls, but guess what? We actually want to implement as well our own controls. Can you do that? And because we're built on a graph database technology, we can build in those controls. So we actually built in all of their controls. There was over 100 custom controls that we built in that resulted in, like, the base of everything we do is a search. And that's where you get very, very granular, and you can do relations between objects. So you can get very, 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 very detailed. And that resulted in about 300 or 400 unique searches that we built in for them. And then they took those, like you said, through a vetting process in their own company and made sure there were no false positives and then tuned them. But then once they were done doing that, they actually had their controls built into the cloud, which is something they could never actually do in their data center. So they took their controls from the data center and said, how do we cloudify these? But they can never actually automatically audit them. And now they put in the cloud. And for them, their whole push was getting applications to the cloud, getting their first data into the cloud. And, the statistic I like to say around that is that, it used to take a minimum of 2 FTEs. Now we're talking, senior security auditors, not junior staff. So 2 senior security staff, 2 of them, a minimum of 2 weeks for every single application to audit. And then after they've implemented the controls just to check for this stuff, and if it's green, basically promote to prod, they can do it in 24 hours. And so, that's a great example of building controls with high specificity, and then how it's helping organizations do security at the speed and the scale of the cloud. And that's why I love, whether it being a CISO consuming the cloud or helping organizations understand how to do this, because there's just such an untapped amount of power there that I think is going to help security teams immensely as they go on this journey.
I liken that story to one I heard about, the ability and accuracy of computers versus humans with detecting abnormalities in a mammogram. Now, did a machine know how to find it all on its own? No. But with precision and rigor on the education, the accuracy of what you're teaching, now we know, right? Multifold faster and more efficient and effective than a human. So, that's where it gets exciting for sure, when you start to see those types of things come to fruition. And but it's interesting when we talk about automation, and Eric, I'm curious what you think. Patrick, chime in. As much as we hear about it, as much as every program now is saying, hey, Eric, I analyzed your program and you really should use this code for least privilege, I don't know many that are flipping that switch to let it go. Truly allowing the automation to go, I guess, to your point, Patrick. But will we ever get there?
Yeah,
I think so. Yeah. Sorry, Patrick,
I think so too. I'll definitely let you speak, Eric. I think the one thing I'd say to that is I think many are dabbling, right? I agree. They're not they're not using this full stop in production. But I think many see the writing on the wall and they're like, geez, if I'm automating provisioning and I'm automating deprovisioning, why aren't I automating, the correction, right? And some of us have chosen a philosophy where we try not to correct in production. We tear things down, we fix it in the pipeline, we republish, right? Some of us have tried to stick to that philosophy, but others still, and this is probably the vast majority of us, to your point, Grant, still fix things in production, right? And so if we're automating everything else, I think there is an appetite to dabble, but I think, to the point of the conversation we just had, I think the results are underwhelming, right? Especially in tools where you can't change those assumptions, where there is no ability to customize, even like the assumptions around what makes an alert a high severity, right? Yeah. Geez, we hear so much about, I don't want to use 7 different, cloud security products. I think as a practitioner, the largest reason is every single one, decides what's high severity on its own, and none of them share, that context between each other. It's kind of a mess. So yeah, I think there's an appetite. I just think so far our ability as sort of operators of this technology is to get the exact right results is limited at best on a grand scale.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And I think, just as we're all learning, we're all making the transition to the cloud world. And again, we see it in the DevOps world, as Patrick said. How do you think they're deploying code? How do you think they're deploying infrastructure? It's all automation. So we're deploying the problems with automation, right? Yeah. And I think in the security space, we've kind of got this once bitten, twice shy sort of approach, where back in the data center, when we tried to use automation, maybe there was a time we screwed up and it was really hard to unwind that problem because it was complex. And so, what I say to security practitioners and CISOs now is that you're doing, like I just said, you're developing with automation, you're releasing with automation, you're building with automation, you're actually creating many, many problems with automation. Use the same automation that you're using. It's not a different product. It's not a different thing. Use the same automation to fix your problems. And oh, by the way, like if you screw up, you can also fix it really quickly. I can think of an example where a piece of automation kind of went sideways because someone screwed up and it deleted a whole bunch of S3 buckets with a whole bunch of data that probably shouldn't got deleted. But guess what? We got that data back like that because we were using the cloud tools to back it up, and we restored that data before anybody even noticed. So I think it's part of the security practitioners just getting over that sort of innate fear of first using automation, but then worrying about making a mistake, and starting to realize is that, like, listen, 99% of the time, you're going to solve your problems at speed and at scale with far less resources. And that one time that something does screw up, you're going to use the same sort of tools in the cloud to fix that problem. And I've yet to see a problem because of automation that wasn't solvable within a reasonable amount of time. I mean, yes, you could probably pull an edge case where, someone did something crazy and encrypted everything and you couldn't get it back. But those are like the edge cases that you'll hardly ever see, And I think that's why. I think it's just a thing.
No question, the resiliency in the cloud is, nothing to compare. And I think, Patrick, here's what I'm hearing, right? I'm hearing farm animals, pets, farm animals, right? That we kind of have this, to your point, Eric, that we're automating all these things, but then we kind of go back to old practices, once bitten, twice shy, what have you. But to really get in the mindset of farm animals, you're producing a product. And if anywhere along that pipeline there's a flaw, you kill it, you send it back through the pipeline. Because it can happen at the speed of cloud, right? Yeah. And so I do believe that will prevail. But I tell you, I think it's because old habits die hard, man. Yep. And these guys and gals that have been managing and maintaining data centers and physical stuff, it's just hard to wrap their arms all the way around this concept. I remember the first time I heard it. Yeah. I mean, it was like, But
For
it's
sure.
brilliant.
You know, and to your point, it's not just old infrastructure. It's also how we build apps, right? If we're still building big monolithic apps, we can't replace a piece of it.
Yeah.
We can't,
Yeah.
you know, we can't take the risk engine down for a minute and have the inventory engine still work, right? Now that we're building apps out of microservices and ourselves building microservices, we can, right? But so that's a nuanced conversation where it's not just about security, it's about software development, it's not just about how we release software, it's about the philosophy, right? And so it all kind of fits together. In the most modern ways this can be done. How many of us employ all the most modern techniques throughout software development and infrastructure? Very few of us, right?
Yeah, and I think Grant made a really good point there. We've been talking around, you know, this whole conversation is, you know, I was fortunate enough that after that one role where I took that company, we moved to the cloud. I landed as a CISO role in a company fully in the cloud, so I had to learn, and that was my main focus. However, 99% of the CISOs that I talk to have the job of still protecting their data centers at the same time as wrapping their heads around the cloud. And yes, there's a lot of stuff that is, you know, congruent that you can, that's kind of, the principles are the same. The cloud is a new world and you have to learn the new world, and that takes time. And so I find a lot of CISOs are like, man, I wish I could do the cloud better because it's already gotten away from me. And I'm still trying to protect the data center over here. And I think that's a big crux of the problem. And, you know, what did I do? I took my smartest sysadmin, who's really, really smart, and I made him my cloud admin. Now, he figured it out and you know, he's very, you know, great in that way. But we're also seeing a lot of that happen is like we're taking our most trusted data center resources and we're saying, ta-da, tomorrow you're now the new cloud guru. Well, nobody learns overnight. And so that's also part of the problem is that, you know, we're not getting the time, or a lot of CISOs I talk to are not getting the time, or more importantly, I think, given the time to actually learn more about the cloud and to build a cloud security practice properly to be able to all the wonderful things we're talking about. And that's why you see them using sort of old data center technologies and approaches in the cloud, hoping that they'll work. That's one reason. And the second one is because we've been talking about it for 20 years.
Exactly.
I mean, who hasn't been reporting on vulnerability scanning and AV scanning for 20 years? It's a language that CISOs are comfortable talking about. It's a language that executive teams are used to hearing. And if you report to the board, it's metrics that they're used to seeing. And now with the cloud, sometimes who cares about the AV statistic? I've got Kubernetes and ephemeral machines. I don't have I'm not saying this, I do, but like I know organizations that don't have AV on anything because nothing lasts longer than 5 minutes. Yeah. And so you're also having to retrain yourself
I was just going to say, Patrick and I, 4 years ago, authored a presentation, and it had quite a mouthful for a title, I'll admit. But mind you, 2018, my CEO just told me we're moving to our data center to the cloud. What's the big deal? So literally 4 years ago, we wrote this presentation on, you know, kind of this misconception that just because you've owned a sailboat with a 1-bedroom doesn't qualify you to sit in the bridge of, a cruise ship with 500 rooms, right? It was just trying to put it, and the difference when you have a UI, AWS, that's designed for Fortune 1 and 1 billion. I mean, everybody. Yeah. That too has an impact, right? And it was a terrific presentation. We did it a lot. It was a lot of fun. But I think we were spot on. What were we going to say, Patrick?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think I can't imagine you are in any way sort of outside the brain drain problem in Eastern Canada, Eric, right? I mean, if I was thinking about the ideal security team, I'd want some old school, right? I'd want some new school who really only know the new ways. I'd want a little bit in between, but it's that new school deep experience that's really, really hard to hire for, right? So some of this is done pretty honestly. Some of it we do because we make really poor assumptions, but some of it is because it's really, really hard to find mature, skilled cloud native talent. It just is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's about giving, I think I come back to it's about organizations need to understand that this is a fundamental shift. It's not like you're switching from a regular firewall to a next generation firewall where you can sort of kind of get up to speed pretty quickly. It's a fundamental shift which needs relearning, and organizations need to give time to this. And, you know, a joke I had with somebody last week about DevOps, and this might get me in trouble in the DevOps world, is like, I'm actually looking for ops that can do dev, because sometimes I get devs that can't do any ops. And that's where a lot of the problems happen. And so some of the best cloud people that I have, to Patrick's point, were sysadmins that were given the time to make the shift to the cloud. And there's some of my best cloud security people, and I ran cloud operations teams as well. There were some of my best cloud operations people because they understood operations, and now they understood the development side to do infrastructure as code. And so it's about organizations, to your point, Grant, doing this. And I mean, how many times have you guys probably heard the line from a senior executive, well, we went to the cloud, we're secure, right? By going to the cloud, we're secure.
Sure.
I mean, I remember the first time I heard a very senior executive that is actually a very intelligent person say that. The internal conversation in my head and trying not to let it show on my face was a Herculean struggle.
Are you
like,
out
wow,
of your
like,
Vulcan
that
mind?
can't be so wrong.
One more
nothing-
webinar about the shared responsibility model. Here we come, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's
exactly.
So, well, it's. I think it's remarkable how misunderstood it all is, and I'll give you the example I've recited many times. I think, Eric, you'll appreciate this. You know, we have on-premise mindset. They read about an ELB. So they go to the guy, Patrick, who's been managing their F5 load balancer, and he's now going to manage the ELB because, come on, it's just a load balancer, right? Yeah. And there's a little bit more than that that's different between the two, right? But it's that notion that, oh, the same name must be, it's the same thing, right?
Yeah. Or trying to explain, like I answer a lot of third-party, risk questionnaires in my internal CISO role for customers. And, how many times I have to explain why we don't have a firewall per se as some part of our platform or our infrastructure. You got to get into network security groups and NACLs and all these other things. And they
have
just want you to
20,000
answer
firewalls.
the box.
Yeah.
Right? They just want you to answer the box. Yes, I've got a firewall, and trying to explain, so it's that, and it comes right back to it. And I think the biggest thing for CISOs today is that, what I'm seeing is the cloud environments are getting away from them. And then when they do either inherit them or get around to, or God forbid something happens and they have to take care of it, it's gotten away from them, and they don't really know why. And so, rightfully so, they use what they know, and they scramble to put the controls in place that they know, and they tune their VA scanners and they tune their AV and they sort of tune their stuff, and then they think they're good, and then they keep reporting on the same stuff that they reported in the data center, where we come back to the conversation about identities. Well, who really cares if I have AV on that box? You know what's sitting on that box? There's actually an identity sitting on that box that is the equivalent of S3 star that has access to all of my data in the most sensitive account. And by the way, that box has a vulnerability on it that if someone gets on it, they're not going to load malware on that box. They're going to steal the identity and then automatically use the identity, go grab the data and transfer it out the window. That's what's going to happen. So you're also, CISOs are kind of at this false sense of security until the day comes, God forbid, that something happens and someone says to them, well, you told us for the last 2 years that we were good. What happened? And there's this visibility that into the real risks that are happening in the cloud that I think a lot of CISOs are missing. And to be honest, it's an education thing. And I think that this is a big part of what I do is to help CISOs understand. Listen, number one, I made the same mistake and I learned, and now I'm trying to help you guys learn. Here's actually the top 1, 2, 3 priorities that you need to be thinking about.
Yeah.
maybe before you think about these other ones that were more traditional controls.
Yeah. Well, and the one thing we know for sure is, this river called the cloud, right? I mean, it's screaming, man. It's moving. There's fast water. There's rapids. It's very turgid. And we are far from the end of our journey in cloud native and the evolution. It's super exciting. It's why I've said, and I know Patrick has heard me before, absolutely one of the greatest things about this industry is it doesn't matter when you're getting in at the beginning of something. And, it's super, super exciting. Well, Eric, out of appreciation and respect for your time, I certainly don't want to keep you beyond your commitment, but want to thank you very, very much for thoughtful conversation, keen insights. It was really great talking with you. Thank you very much.
Awesome. I appreciate it. This is actually a lot of fun. It's really fun talking to you guys. And, I love your perspectives on things. So it's a great conversation. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's our
thanks,
pleasure.
Eric. It was great.
Yeah. Well, again, this is a new format for us. And so we're super excited and appreciative of you being our first guest in our new Talking Cloud format. So thanks again.
Awesome. And if you need anything after the fact, just let me know. And happy to do this again. This was a great time today, guys.
Terrific. Will do. Thanks so much, Eric.
All right. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Seth from SpiderBat. I'm excited to tell you more about SpiderBat and why we got things started. The original founders of Tipping Point, Mark Willoughby-Lemire and Brian Smith, they saw how organizations were struggling with the current security operations model, how we detect and investigate potential threats. Our current threat detection tools and our investigations really rely on log data. And logs are made up of exception-based events that doesn't really capture or understand context. Well, this leads to missed attacks because we have poor quality detections and our investigations require really arduous manual analysis. It's our security analysts who have to go alert by alert, understanding with log data, well, why did this alert fire? And what are all the activities that led up to this point in time? And if it does look like a real attack has landed within the environment, well, what has been impacted? What systems, what accounts, what files have been touched by this particular attacker? And so this broken security operations model that really requires this real manual investigation and this real manual investigation truly becomes non-viable as we adopt more Linux cloud and container speed. So if you think about those environments, that rate of change, when you couple in the complexities of microservices, so I've broken down an application across multiple different containers, across ephemeral systems that are auto-provisioning up and down. Well, now we've completely impaired our existing security operations model, this ability to, one, to detect a threat within that environment, but now trying to investigate within that environment where logs may not have been captured, or if they were captured, the state of those systems have changed since the point of time that you're investigating. So it really becomes just an unusable model in the environments that are now mostly growing, the most fast-growing environments within our company. So Mark and Brian founded SpiderBat to solve this challenge, what we call SpiderBat's Linux runtime security. It really changes the game. It starts by recording everything. Now, I know you've heard that before from other vendors. So what do we mean by saying we record everything? We record system-level interactions, so processes starting and stopping, network connections coming in and out, the full user sessions of activities. And then we do that while recognizing their causal connections. So for example, when I log into a system, a network connection comes in, it creates a shell for me because I logged in successfully, and then I'm executing commands out of that shell. Well, these activities all have a relationship with each other that log data doesn't really capture or represent. What SpiderBat does is we capture every activity as it's happening across all your systems, and we're recognizing these causal connections. And we do these for all activities, good, bad, or otherwise, without an alert, without anything being triggered. We're just constantly capturing these activities into a causal map of your environment. And with this map, we can now accurately detect threats. And we detect them from their initial entry point because we build a trace of activities leading up to suspicious activities and from those, the full impact of those suspicious activities. And this allows us to immediately answer fundamental questions of what happened, what's been impacted, how do we clean it up, and how do we prevent it. Let me show you an example. Let me be able to show you how this works. All right, what you are looking at is an example of how SpiderBat captures activities and assigns causal relationships to these activities. So in this example, we have a system, and that's the S node. When that system booted, it started a process called System D, and we see other processes that were initiated by System D. Now, I'm not showing you all the activities of this Linux server. For example, I could go and add in all of the different processes that are launched by System D when this particular server booted. And each of these would have a branch of children underneath all of these. So I'm showing you just a snippet of activities on this particular system, but it gives you an example of everything that we're capturing. So I'm showing you the SSH daemon, the database server, MySQL, and a web server that are running on this particular system called Ubuntu. I can also see with the gray badges, the user permission boundaries. So systemd runs as root. You can see that the database MySQL has a service account it runs as called MySQL. And you can see the web server has its own service account called www.data. Additionally, I can see network connections as they come in and out of the system. So I can see with the C node here, a connection and the direction here, it came into the web server. It was received by one of the web listeners that runs as www.data. Similarly, we could see network connections going out and what process led to that network connection going out. And then lastly, we can color this graph with flags. A flag is a suspicious activity, maybe a rare event that's uncommon to run on a server, or it's a known indicator of compromise, perhaps being related to threat intel that's fed into our system. What's really different about SpiderBat is we don't alert you to a flag. A flag is just context. It's the color on the graph. We can create notifications around when we see multiple flags and a depth of activity because we have the full context of the trace available now to make determinations. In this example, we see a single flag with absolutely no outcome. Nothing has been causally related to the impact of anything after that flag occurred. If there are new activities, this entire trace will get rescored by SpiderBat as we see new additional activities that are causally related to this flag and including any other flags. So let me show you an example of what that looks like. So here we have, you can see there's more activity in this particular trace. And more importantly, we see more flags. So this is indicative of an attack coming into the system where we have flags that are causally connected to each other. And we have just more activity, more breadth of activity. We can see here that, similar to our previous trace, we have a single web server. We have a single server marked by the S node. It launched systemd, which launched the web server Apache. And we have a network connection that came into Apache. And we see now multiple processes that were instigated by this network connection. Now, if I go ahead and click on a node, I can open up the details pane. The details pane shows me additional detail about the selected node on the graph. In this case, I'm looking at the shell that was spawned by the web server after this network connection came in. And I can see by reading into the details, it's very curious. I have a ping command, but there's no IP address. Instead of an IP address, I have a semicolon, and then this long printf string, which I can't see. I don't read binary, so I don't know what that does. I can see that it was read into a temp file. Permissions were changed on that temp file, and then it executes that temp file. And when it's done executing, it'll delete that temp file. And as I click next node here, I can move temporally through the graph, and I can get to, here's the ping that doesn't ping anything. And then it changes files on this temp file that was created, and then it executes that temp file. And like I said, I don't know what this temp file is. Looks like it's just randomly generated letters. But with SpiderBat, I can see the outcome of running this file. So these are the causal outcomes from executing this file, first of which is an outbound network connection that goes out on port 4444. And I can see a shell gets created by this. Now, a security analyst could look at this level of information and now very quickly make an assessment that there is an attack on the web server that has created a shell on the web server, and it's created now an outbound network connection or a reverse shell. I have enough information to know that this is a real attack. I know where the attack is coming from, and I know what has been impacted already by the attacker. And I can see that they've now are on the system and they're doing reconnaissance activity. This command here, ID, who am I running as? They're looking at directories, they're reading files. And all of this has occurred. If I go back to the first connection, the first activity here, which was that network connection coming in, the relative time marker tells me all of this has transpired within 2 minutes. So within 2 minutes, this attacker has been able to perform a code insertion into the web server, get a shell, create a reverse shell back to their system, and is now rooting around the system trying to find information. So, and with the number of flags here, SpiderBot recognizes the severity of this, not by a single flag that now the analyst has to investigate, is this real? What's happened? What's light up? I have this entire picture immediately available to me as a security analyst to see the collection of flags and how they were causally connected, and anything else that this attacker has performed. So even these activities that aren't flags, but they're causally connected to this trace. So I have that complete picture at my disposal. Now, if for some reason we didn't stop the attacker, certainly have enough information here to block the IP address, shut down maybe the network connection to the server, clean up the web page that the attacker was able to infiltrate using a code insertion, etc. For some reason we didn't stop the attacker. Well, SpiderBat, it's constantly building out this graph. It's constantly building this map of causal connections. And it's helping me to focus on only the causal activities related to this set of flags and any other flags that may be generated within the trace, which means if we allow more time to occur, the attacker is going to continue to, in this case, is able to escalate privileges to Douglas. Now, again, looking at the time here, I can see 23 hours passed between this node and this node. You can see, now it's minus 23 hours. Well, what happened? I can see that as that attacker was doing discovery, doing reconnaissance on the system, came across an HT password file, and 23 hours later, the attacker was able to become Douglas. Well, with SpiderBat, we continue to follow the trace, even if that is across privileged user escalations as they're changing user sessions. And now they're Douglas, and you can see they continue to do more discovery here until they realize that they can move laterally to yet a whole other server. With SpiderBat, whether it's long periods of time, user sessions, systems, you can see all the flags here generated on the second system here, we just continue to track the causal activity as a trace. Now you can remember all of the different processes that I showed you running on the system. There's lots of other activities that are occurring on these servers, other users that are connecting, other network connections going in and out. In our typical log analysis, we will run pivot searches on, show me all the users' activities, show me all the network connections on these systems, show me all the firewall traffic. You're getting all these logs and now trying to manually connect, well, what's related to my investigation and how it might be related to my investigation. With SpiderBat, I just have a clear, focused view of exactly what's causally related to this set of activities, and as well as any new activities that may be created, even as I'm investigating. So I have a complete picture to understand what's happened, what's been impacted. In this case, I can see what files have been touched, what user accounts have been impacted, compromised by the attacker, what services have been compromised by the attacker, what other systems has the attacker been on. So I have a complete understanding of the scope to understand the impact of this. And now I can contain this threat, and I can go and prevent this type of attack in the future with the information provided by SpiderBat. So this is one example of how SpiderBat functions, whether it's an external attack like this, an insider threat, maybe even just a misconfiguration. We capture the ripple effect of these activities and give you that focused lens of exactly what's happened and the scope of what's happened so that you can completely clean up this activity from your environment. I hope that this has been a great understanding of what SpiderBat does, why we built the solution the way we did to really counter a lot of the current impracticalities of today's security operations model. And if you are interested, I invite you to take a closer look at SpiderBat, where at our website, spiderbat.com, you can book a demo with us. We'll give you a personalized demo based on the needs that you have within your environment, as well as give you the ability to try out SpiderBat, whether you want to use our Defend the Flag Linux challenges, where we've captured attacks just like this and can quiz you on your ability to recognize the attack, or being able to install using our free tier, being able to run SpiderBat within your own environment and see exactly how tracing looks. Thank you again for your time.